everybody. Welcome to Love.Life Telehealth Facebook Live. Today we have a very special program. And first, while I'm giving some information about Sachin Shah, who is here, can you tell us where you're watching from and let us know what in the comments? But I would like to introduce, we're going to be talking about something called Alphagal. And we have an expert on with us. We have two experts. But Sachin Shah, PharmD, is a CEO of Vegan Med. It's a group that has a mission dedicated to addressing medication safety and transparency. He's also a professor of pharmacy at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. At the university, he's director of the Fellowship in Industry program and the Innovative Clinical and Outcomes Research Group. He also has a teaching affiliation with the United States Air Force, has conducted research studies on drugs, diets, devices, generating over 100 peer-reviewed publications and posters. His research has garnered over 1 billion media impressions, including even on CNN, NPR, BBC News, and he's been featured in multiple documentaries globally. So we are honored to have him. He's a fellow of the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association. He served the needs of thousands of Alphagal patients looking for animal-free medications and is credited for filing a citizen's petition to the FDA for medication ingredients transparency, which is incredibly important. So I'd love to introduce Mr. Sachin Shah, and we also have Dr. Suzannah Bozzone, I'm terrible about saying your name, on, and she actually has personal experience with Alphagal in family members. So we'll get her input too later. But let's start with Sachin. Nice to meet you, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, Kim, thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. That was a nice long intro, but the simple version is kind of tied to your name, which is Love.Life. And I just love people. I love humanity, and I want to do as much as I can to serve people. So that's the simple motivation behind everything we do.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So tell us about Alphagal. What is it? I mean, I don't know if people have heard about that.
Yeah, the name Alphagal is not what one may think. We're not talking about a female that's alpha nature here. This is actually a tick-borne condition. And who would have thought that a tick could bite somebody and that ultimately manifests as a red meat allergy, putting it very simply. Now, commonly, the most prevalent tick that this is tied to is known as the Lone Star tick, and it is found in the southeast hemisphere of the United States, so say east of Texas, but there have been cases as far up as Canada. So you're going your merry day and you get bit by this tick, and now you have this condition known as Alphagal syndrome. It's essentially an allergy. And the CDC estimates that about 450,000 people in the United States have this condition. And of course, cases have been documented globally. So, of course, we can get deeper into it, but the short version is a tick-borne condition, highly prevalent in the United States. Estimates say the numbers are even higher than Lyme disease. So that's a good comparison.
And so how does it manifest itself, and why is it important to us?
Yeah, great question. From a manifestation standpoint, essentially you are allergic to alpha-gal, which is a carbohydrate, and you know how your body generally reacts as lock and key models. So you have an allergen and an antigen. So you're reacting to any kind of allergen that is being exposed to yourself, may that be food or medications or even fumes. Like imagine you're going to a barbecue. Since you have this condition, you could react just from the alpha-gal molecule that is coming out from a barbecue. And the typical symptoms are hives and urticaria type symptoms. But there's also a GI-only variant of this. And what that means is you don't have any other symptoms other than just GI symptoms. And it is important to note that, the average time to diagnosis is about 7 years. So the patient burden on it is huge because based on the recent CDC data, 50% of providers in the country don't even know about this syndrome. 5% actually feel confident in even diagnosing this. So it's possible that, it just gets missed. And the other aspect of this is the symptoms can present much later than when you take in the food or the medication. So 2 to 6 hours after, and that's not unreasonable. So sometimes even us as somebody who may be experiencing the symptoms may not associate it with the last thing we ate or the last thing we consumed. So it's a little bit of a tricky condition. But yes, it generally hives and urticaria, and there's also a GI only version of it as well.
Yeah.
And it
And
can be
can I bring up just one comment, because that GI only version is really, because there's so much IBS diagnosed out there, and there's so much gut stuff and to think of the allergy, because we're not triggered really to think that if we only have GI symptoms, do I need to go to an allergist? You'd think I need to go to a gastroenterologist. And so that's I think a really important point.
It is very important. And what concerns me is not just the rashes or the itching or the GI symptoms, the nausea, the vomiting, anything like that, but it can actually kill people if they have an anaphylactic reaction to Alphagal. And so you've got to be careful. I mean, that's where the veganmed.com is really, really important, because there are medications that we use on a regular basis, or things that have gelatin in them, which are animal-based, that can cause serious problems to patients who have Alphagal syndrome. Can you go?
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, especially about the potential for fatal events. I think that is a real risk that is highly underappreciated. In fact, on just a few weeks ago, JAMA published a nice review article on this topic, and they went at length talking about Alphagal syndrome. And of course, they talked about the management, which was avoiding food, but also medications. But I believe even in that article, it is under-recognized. So we presented some data last year where 92% of the people who have Alpha-Gal syndrome have had to change their medications because they're having some type of reaction to it. 50% of these have had an anaphylactic reaction because of medications. So it has a huge impact on just the patient experience. It has a huge impact on the healthcare system as a whole. And it also has an impact on the insurance companies, because now their overall cost goes up as well, because people are showing up in the hospital more frequently. And it has an impact on transparency and manufacturing of drugs, because they need to think about this and they need to share this with patients. And I think it's a fundamental ethics issue, because as human beings, we all deserve to know what is in our food, what is in our medications. So, that's the problem that we're solving at Vegan Med around transparency, especially around animal-derived ingredients in medications.
Yeah. And it's not just meds, it's cosmetics, it's some immunizations, it's some things like that. Really quickly, Suzannah, I was going to wonder, what's your experience with it, and how did you discover?
Yeah. So I'm in Tennessee. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so I first heard of it was, of course, by a patient, because I'd never heard of it before. And she's like, I have Alphagal. And, when you sit there and you're like, oh, trying to like go through the files in your head and think, I don't think there is one on that. And and that was kind of when I first moved here about 2016 or so, where that's the first time I'd ever heard of it. And then, we don't have any animal products in our house at all. My husband, though, is not as strict in his plant-based eating outside of the home. And so it was his 50th birthday party. And we had a cabin, and we were just staying there with my sister and my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law was like, hey man, let's go get some steaks and grill out some steaks. And of course, like, I could have it. I would never know, because you're not consuming it. You're not going to know if you have it. And we have so many Lone Star ticks everywhere around here. And we live in like a tree house. And so we have deer like right now I have deer walking through my yard, all the time. And so they go out and they get steaks and whatever. And I'm like very happily eating whatever my plant-based deliciousness is. And then a few hours later, and apparently the symptoms can be magnified also if you have some alcohol with it, right? So his birthday, he has a steak, he has some red wine. And then a few hours later, he just gets terribly itchy hives, feels horrible, just miserable. And I might not have been as sympathetic as maybe if he was like a patient, but he's my husband. And I was like, I bet you have alpha-gal. so that's probably not the appropriate response. And I did give him some Benadryl, and he did not have anaphylaxis. And thankfully, he's still alive and well today. Good news. But all that to say, so we go back to my brother-in-law's house a few weeks later, who always makes like tacos, and he'll do like plant-based tacos for us plant-based eaters. And then he made some ground beef. And so my husband was like, I really don't believe it. And I was like, don't do it. You can die. And so he goes, I'm going to have just a tablespoon of ground beef and just see what happens. And again, it happened. And so that was we didn't get the IgE antibody test, which is the test that you get. But it was very clear, and it was actually quite empowering, right? Because I think that a lot of people might have been exposed to Alphagal, if you've heard of it, through the Radio Lab podcast, which is a very popular podcast. And they do this very entertaining episode about this woman that has it. And then they talk about, creating these genetically modified pigs that don't have Alphagal for medical procedures. But what they don't talk about is, but what about the health impacts that we are, the benefits of not eating these red meats? And it's, as the whole time, that they're talking about how delicious hot dogs are and steaks, but they're not talking about the cancer risk and the diabetes risk and the cardiovascular risk. And so anyway, so for us, and then I have many patients that have it as well. And they come into me this state of like, what am I going to do? And I'm like, this is great. This is like, destiny. If we see it as such, perception creates a reality. So that's been our experience. And he actually does not have it anymore. So that's been about 3 years. Well, we don't know how long he's had it, right? Because he so rarely eats any animal products. So it's hard to say, but he, anyway, he tried it again a few years later, and he no longer had a response. And it had been about 3 years since his first experience.
So you have a lot to package in there. One is testing. So it's an IgE. You can go to your doctor if you're concerned and get a blood test for IgE. There are some skin tests that you can do. I don't suggest you do what he did, which is,
yes,
I think I have it and let's try it. No, don't do that. Treatment, basically, you can help with the symptoms. For example, with, meds for allergies, allergy meds and steroids, but you don't want to do that. The third thing I heard when you were talking is the modified pigs. And yes, if you need a heart valve in your heart, and you would want a modified pig, but you don't want to sit there and eat things that can give you cancer and other things anyways. But Sachin, do you have other comments to?
Yeah, no. What a great summary, and resonate with all those points. Suzannah also talked about the specific drug, Benadryl, in her case, and it's so interesting. One of the top drugs that is talked about in Alphagal social media groups is actually Benadryl, and it just happens to be that of all the Benadryls out there, a lot of them have animal-derived ingredients in the first place. Wow. So it's possible that the very Benadryl is causing you to have a greater reaction. So at Vegan Med, we're solving that problem. And what we did is we went out and we certified one of the Benadryl products, diphenhydramine is the generic name for it, as certified animal-free. And now patients can kind of be more confident in the choices that they're making. But isn't that ironic? The very thing that you're supposed to be treating yourself with could actually be the trigger itself. And since we're talking about medications, I think it's a good, thing to mention that all of these patients should be getting their doctors to give them epinephrine so that they can have them as needed, or when needed, I should say. So I think it's a must-have that as a safety precaution. I think epinephrine should be part of their toolkit. And then you also mentioned that you were saying that it seems like his symptoms are now gone 3 years later. And that's worth mentioning, but I don't promote necessarily people re-challenge themselves to see if their symptoms are gone. Fortunately, his wife is a doctor, and you can do it in a more controlled
Yeah,
environment.
we don't have
But
an
there are,
EpiPen.
but yeah, no, absolutely, there are some scenarios where patients have had their so-called syndrome go away. Part of that is if you don't get bit again and again, that does seem to be helping with this so-called syndrome disease condition go away as well. So some of those risk factors need to be factored in on whether it's going to get resolved or not.
Yeah, I think the research I looked at said it's about 3 years when you can see a decrease in IgE, but that's if you're not bit again. And the other thing I want to mention to people who are listening is it's not just meat. Don't forget that milk can have alpha-gal. So milk and cheeses and, the pork we mentioned and things like that are really important. So just be careful about what you're eating and see a doctor if you have any of these symptoms.
So Kim, if I may grab the steering wheel for a second,
Please.
you touched on a very important point. Milk, and you think of lactose when you think of milk, is in the majority of medications used as a binder. And that's another common question that comes to us all the time. And the interesting thing is the solutions do exist. So you take a common drug like Lipitor, known as atorvastatin. There are tons of Lipitor manufacturers out there, but there are some that don't use lactose in there, and those would be very suitable. Another common ingredient is magnesium stearate, which can be plant sourced or animal sourced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, it's important to know where is the source of this magnesium stearate in your tablet. And unfortunately, you got to call the manufacturer or use a certified animal-free product. And sometimes the manufacturers get it wrong. So we did a study where we called 20% of the top pharma companies, and we asked them about animal-derived ingredients. And 40% of the time, they weren't even able to give an adequate answer, right? So I think that it's always good for the patients to also be cognizant of what they're taking and doing their own due diligence or going to a reliable source, may that be their provider, vegan med, etc.
I think vegan med is invaluable for that. I mean, if you think you have alpha-gal or you have a family member who has alpha-gal, get to vegan med because it is important. It's ubiquitous. We find it everywhere. And when I was doing some research, it was like violin strings it's everywhere that you can find these things. So be very careful on that. And I think I saw a talk about it, and they were talking about tick bites, but that the infant ticks actually can bite and look like chiggers. So if you've had chigger bites, that may put you, what you consider chigger bites, it may put you at risk for alpha-gal too. So
those things are tiny. I mean, my son got a bunch of those, and because they're usually in nests, and so he got about 8 at one time. But I've seen case reports of hundreds that if you walk through a nest, and they're not.
Yeah. No, great point. The other interesting thing that is worth mentioning is an ingredient called carrageenan.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't recognize this, but a lot of alpha-gal patients are also reacting to carrageenan, which is actually not animal sourced. It's actually algae sourced. So a lot of medications will use carrageenan in there, and even food has it too, and you can react to it. And a great example in this scenario is what they are calling novel oral anticoagulants, and there's 4 in the U.S. market. And out of those 4, one of them actually uses carrageenan in the capsule piece of it. So it doesn't have animal-derived ingredients from the perception of lactose and magnesium stearate, but because of the carrageenan piece of it, you actually should be careful if you're that sensitive that you're reacting to that as well. And again, as a disclaimer, not all patients who are sensitized to alpha-gal will develop the allergy, and not everybody that has the allergy will always react to lactose or magnesium stearate or carrageenan. So if you think of it as a funnel, that number gets smaller and smaller. And of course, it's the rare people that are reacting to fumes, but avoiding and being aware of this is extremely important, because you don't want to be that person that ends up in the hospital because of a anaphylactic reaction, and hopefully never have a fatal event as a result of it.
So we had a question from Natasha. How do you spell carrageenan?
Oh, now she's putting me on the spot. You got it? You got it? CARREAGENNAN is the close enough version, but I can probably Google that and verify that.
I'm not sure either. Lori Grande said, my youngest son is allergic to meat, found out when he swelled and got splotchy and his face and neck swelled. It was scary. Didn't even know this was a thing. And as you mentioned, Sachin, in the beginning, many doctors have no idea about this. I didn't know about it until a patient mentioned Alphagal to me. And then I'm thinking about all my patients who have IBS symptoms, who get these bad abdominal pains 6 hours after they eat. And I'm like, oh, maybe we should check IgE on them. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. And what's interesting, and I think is impressive, is it's spreading from the south, southeast, and it's spreading, and it's becoming more common. And I think global warming may have something to do with that, with the increase of the deers moving, with the deer ticks moving. We're seeing it in Europe and Australia and America, all over. So it's becoming very well known. I don't know.
Apparently, it's a different tick. So the Lone Star tick, which we have a lot of here, especially in the southeast, and what's growing up more north, it's got this white dot on the back. But there are other tick species that are spreading it around the world, apparently.
Yeah, no, it's very fascinating, but I'm glad you mentioned the tie-in to global warming and climate change. I think it's very real as to how climate change is affecting healthcare, and in fact, the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA have been focusing on the topic and the tie-in between climate change and its impact on health a lot more in the last year or two.
Yeah.
On the same line of kind of healthcare medications, I think it's worth mentioning devices as well, because you also mentioned heart valves, but it translates to devices as a whole, because we have scenarios where the medication that is in a device, like an inhaler or something, the molecule part of it or the medication part of it may be okay, but the device can use something like tallow, and some people are reacting to that as well. Who would have thought? But it is a real case.
Yeah. I even some of the adhesives, it can be some of that. So yeah.
And sutures are part of that as well.
Really?
Yep.
Which kind of sutures do you know?
I don't know. I don't know from the top of the head in terms of which brand. Maybe Suzannah. I think we're using
like cat gut. Like that was I can't remember what the real name for that is, but we still call it cat gut. But I guess that would be logical that it would have Alphagal.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Well, let's see if we found the word carrageenan. And yay, Lori, thank you for sharing about your son. I hope that this is helpful, and make sure that your son's physician knows about this, because that's really important for the future for meds and things, and immunizations. Certain immunizations like can be a little bit of a problematic. So not all.
We have some nice blogs on vegan med around immunizations as well.
Great.
Another common one is a colonoscopy prep. And we are actually just releasing a blog today on that topic. That's a very common one that we get.
Wow.
And the other important piece to kind of recognize is that the solutions are available, and I'm happy to share on this platform that for the top 200 drugs out there, more than 70 to 80% of the time, we're able to find patients an animal-free alternative, and that's huge. And in other scenarios, you can actually get medications compounded, and there are compounding pharmacies who can make this happen for you as well. Sometimes people have to pay cash for this, so they need to be aware of that as to how it affects their financial situation. But on the flip side, there are already existing either certified animal-free or verified animal-free products, that we run a national hotline for free for anybody that is curious about what medication have animal-derived ingredients in them. And this is a free service.
Can you tell us more about how we can reach your hotline?
Yep. So you just go to veganmed.org. There's a chat platform. There's a contact us platform. And you just enter in the specific medication or the NDC number, which is basically a unique identifier that medications have. So you either enter the medication or the NDC number, and one of our pharmacists will look into that. We will do the due diligence to ensure that there is no animal-derived ingredients. If you have Alphagal, tell us, and also make sure that the carrageenan part is something that we're aware of as well. Similarly, though, we are also addressing this for people with other personal beliefs, may that be those that are vegans or vegetarians, or they have religious preferences. So it's not just for the Alphagal community that we're doing this. We're trying to solve a global problem around people who are avoiding animal-derived ingredients.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to get to some unrelated questions, but any last-minute things to say about Alphagal before we get to some other questions? Or any specific Alphagal questions in the chat? I can't see Facebook, so I don't know what's in that, but I do see here. And I think we've read most of that. Any other comments, Sachin? Or
yeah, if I may say just one thing from a patient standpoint, you're not alone. Please don't be afraid to speak to your provider or get a second opinion in this scenario, because it is a real scientific, the diagnosis, and it's very real. And on the other side, the options are available relative to avoiding food, avoiding medications, and your voice matters. And I just want people to know that their voice matters. And there are providers like what you guys are doing at Love.Life, and also on the therapeutic side, options are available.
That's awesome. Suzannah, any last minute comments on this?
No, I mean, I think, again, if you are struggling with this, sometimes it's just the perfect thing to get you in the door. And remember that perception creates a reality. So while it is scary and nobody wants a diagnosis, it really is in a backwards way very empowering, because it really kind of sometimes forces us to do something that can be very health optimizing. Health is so important to be on the best journey to ourselves, and sometimes it takes something like this to get us there. So it's kind of can be very, for a lot of people, a hidden blessing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rachel Epstein had a question. Do latex products contain any animal ingredients?
They can. So not latex itself, but the product can. Absolutely.
Good. And love the comments about saying, avoiding using the word vegan in social groups because of the negative connotation. I've used lactose intolerance. If I go to a restaurant and say, I don't want dairy, give me your veggie omelet, no egg or cheese. And people sometimes don't get that. So I'm lactose intolerant. But G.E. Baruch, I think, is saying that he has Alphagal instead. And you might just tell people that he has that. So other off the topic things. One, we are having a Facebook Live, 6 Pillars program coming from Love.Life in the future. So look out for that. And it's talking about lifestyle medicine and what that actually is, and going into deep dives on that. An unrelated question on here. Well, one was about CGM placements anywhere other than the arm, because somebody who uses CGMs. LibraView is only approved for the arm. Dexcom you can use it in different places. That's a different CGM, like fleshy areas in your stomach, your butt, your thigh. But the research has been done on the arm. So I just wanted to do that.
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely.
CGMs is actually an area of fascinating research that my lab does. So the short form is absolutely use it in the places that is indicated by the device manufacturer, like you said. But in fact, we are finding inter-arm differences So for like the Abbott Freestyle Libre, the most common one, whether you use it on your right arm or on your left arm, there is actually differences. So just be cognizant of that, because the new guidelines are talking about looking at time below range, time in range, and time above range in terms of how you manage the condition. But there will be differences in how often you get the alert for hypoglycemia, depending on which arm you wear it on. Doesn't mean that it's something to worry about, but just be cognizant of it as you manage your own condition.
And also, when you're sleeping on one side, it can go lower. So that's just one of those. Lori Browner said, I have type 1.5 diabetes, but gastroparesis is worsened. And 3.5 hours after a meal, I have a blood glucose spike and have to take more insulin. Suggestions on dinner foods for lowering bedtime spike. Susanna and I have some thoughts too. But
yeah, I think it's always nice, especially if you have a continuous glucose monitor, which thank you, GE, for I wanted to say continuous glucose monitor is CGM, and we should have said that at the beginning. So we're bringing that up. And so if you have one, it's really nice to kind of recognize your typical trends where you respond to your higher carbohydrate meals versus your lower glycemic meals, et cetera, based on the time of day. And so that's really nice thing to look at. Certainly look at the fat content if it's spiking later, as opposed to immediately. It often is due to the carbohydrate spike, but if it's spiking later, you might lessen the fat content in your meal if you're having that spike kind of 3 to 4 hours later. But I would look at that and really look at it through the lens of a practitioner that can help you maybe in a continuous glucose monitor to see the composition of your meals and play with it to see, what if I do this or this kind of meal versus that kind of meal, and see what might mitigate that.
Sachin, did you have any comments?
No, I think that's all spot on. But I think what's exciting also is that yesterday the FDA approved the first over-the-counter CGM, which will be available in the market over the summer. It's a Dexcom product.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we are more insulin resistant at night, so make your breakfast and lunch meals bigger, and at night you want to make sure that your meals not only don't spike you at night, but also affect your sugars the next day. So focus more on some green leafy veggies and have that with it, and decrease the fat content, decrease the amount at night, eat more earlier, and things that might help a little bit. But again, as Dr. Suzannah said, come see a physician who knows this and can help you specifically, and do a food and diary so that food timing diary, what's going on. You may also want to, so do that so that you can bring it to the physician who knows what's going on. We can tweak some things for you.
Yeah, that breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper sometimes works really good magic. And also mastering diabetes is a nice, their decision tree can be really helpful in trying to wade through what's going on.
Absolutely. So thank you guys so much. We are out of time, Sachin. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Dr. Suzannah also. Any last comments before we head off? And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. But this has been fascinating. Thank you guys so much. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right, everybody stay healthy, stay happy. And again, have a wonderful day.